Hey guys, what's up? It's Sidechain back with another tutorial, and I got a request for a tutorial from a friend of mine who asked me how do I mix my low end correctly, and today I will show you my techniques and tips how to mix low end correctly to get it really tight and really heavy so that it's pumping in the clubs. All right, so let's quickly dive into the project. I have extracted a kick here from a track I made recently, and I hope we don't get some clicks and pops during the playback because the full mastering chain is on here. So it takes up a lot of CPU, but anyway, I hope it works, and I will just quickly play it for you so you know how the kick and the rumble sounds. So yeah, it's a pretty heavy techno kick with the classic reverb delay rumble. So it's a very punchy, very hard hitting kick with a pretty thick and distorted rumble. Depending on the genre you're doing, you have a like different kind of rumble or sub, but in techno most of the time we're using like rumble like this, and I can quickly also play the kick in solo without the rumble and then just the rumble so that you can hear how they sound like individually. So that's just a kick. Let's hear the rumble. So the rumble is basically a combination of delay, reverb, very heavy distorted, and then just filtered to get just the very low part. I'm using my kick rumble rack here to make this kind of rumbles. You can also do it on a separate channel. I used to do that for a very long time. So that I had different channels where I had a delay rumble, reverb rumble, then I just combined it to a group and process it there. But in my recent projects, basically most of the time I'm using just my kick rumble rack. Then I have everything on one channel and it's a little bit easier in the project and I don't have too many channels. But it doesn't really matter what you're doing. You can also do it on different channels. And so the important thing is how to balance your sub against your kick. And that's one of the main issues. And but before we dive into that, I have to mention that a very, very crucial step in getting your low end right is to sidechain the kick correctly with your sub. And if you don't know how to do that, or if you haven't watched my video yet, please first watch my sidechain tutorial, and I will also link it here. Because this is very crucial that you get that right, because if you don't have the sidechain set up correctly, then it's very hard to get the mixing of your low end right, because then you have a lot of like up and down jumps or phase issues in your low end, and this really makes it very hard to get it right. So just make sure that the sidechain is set up correctly, and then we can proceed with the next step. So the basic idea behind low end and kick is that the kind of volume correlation is at a certain level. So let's quickly just pull up some plugins here so that we can see it a little bit better. Come on. Okay, kick channel here. So I'm using a oscilloscope here, and when you're mixing low end, an oscilloscope can be really helpful, especially if you don't have a treated studio or have a very good listening environment, because in a non-treated room it's very hard to hear low frequencies correctly because it's very boomy, and mixing low end can be really a pain in the ass in such rooms. So an oscilloscope can be really helpful so that you have a visual representation of your audio, and I will quickly demonstrate how it really works. So let's play just a kick in solo. So and here the important thing is we just can freeze it. Okay, so that's basically the shape of the kick, and it's important that you have the correct shape for your kick, and the shape should look kind of like a triangle wave, so it has a very sharp transient, and then it's going slowly down, and then you're kind of slowly going into the reverb rumble or the sub rumble, or you are a sub if you're using a sine wave or something else. And that's very important, and we'll show you another bad example afterwards so that you can get the idea, because you have to think about that all your your kick and your sub will later hit a limiter somewhere, and if you have the heavy bass part of your kick very loud, then your bass is also hitting the limiter, and if you try to limit or clip low frequencies, and especially sub frequencies, this is where it really starts to distort. And so you have to make sure that you're really ready to have low end is not heavily hitting your clipper or your limiter. So you have to get the shape right, and let's just quickly see how it looks like just a rumble. Okay, and here we can see that the shape is kind of like reverse shape from the kick. So you can see here's the space where the kick sits. So we have the kick here. It starts here at the highest point, and then it's like going down the kind of triangle shape, and overlaps with the rumble, and then it builds a kind of solid foundation, like a kind of like very heavy squared wave form, and then you have a really tight low end, and to get the low end looking like this, you have sometimes to use some compression or limiting. Depends on what you're using. If you're just using a sine wave, then of course then you have to don't do a lot of things, because the sine wave is already pretty static. You have just use a correct sidechain. But in case you're using a rumble bass like me, you have to take care of that. So yeah, so in this case we're just pumping up the volume basically, and I'm using some limiting here to get it just a little bit tighter, but you can see even without, it's basically already pretty tight and doesn't have very high jumps up and down, but I'm using just some limiting to make it a little bit more tight and compressed, and so that's a really good tip to use the oscilloscope when you're processing your rumble, because then you can quickly see, okay, do I have some very high jumps up and down, because especially if you're using delay based kick rumbles, sometimes depending on the settings you can have some parts where the rumble is really going up and going down, especially if for example a specific delay time where you accentuating only certain steps of the delays. So at certain points the delay is building up, and then you get kind of effects like this, where you have higher volume at certain delay steps, and you have to take care of that. I'm not saying you have to really squash it completely, because sometimes you need a little bit of dynamic, especially if you're making kind of more groovier genres. In this cases, you can use a little bit more dynamic in the sub to make it bounce a little bit more. But if you have more kind of main room techno track where it's pretty steady and really heavy bass, there it's often better to have it really tight. Okay, so keep that in mind. Try to get your rumble or your bass in general pretty tight without having too big jumps up and down in volume. Only if you're using very groovy or making very groovy like genres, then it's maybe a little bit different. So that's the first step also, to get your bass pretty tight without high jumps in volume. And then, as I said, the crucial part is to get the sidechain right, so that the transition between the kick and the bass is smooth. And let's just see how it looks all together. So we can see that here we have a kind of like a smooth transition. There's not like frequency cancellation here, where we have some big dips, and we also don't have very high jumps up and down in volume. It's like the curve is like here, like pretty much going down, especially. And we can just solo the low end here quickly to see it, how the low end looks like. So everything below 100 Hertz in this case. So you can see that here it looks pretty solid. We have like here the kick, where the kick hits at the beginning, and then we're going into the rumble. So it's like here like pretty tight, and I don't have like phase problems or big jumps up and down in volume. So that's a very crucial step in getting your low end right. And yeah, then as I said, the important step is also to have the balance of the kick against the sub. And usually a good rule of thumb is that you have the sub peaking at 6 dB lower than your kick, especially if you have like kick like this, where the transient is getting up to 0 dB, and then you can just mix in the sub at around 6 dB less, and that's working usually very well. It also depends on the processing you're using later in your mastering or mixing, for example. Sometimes you have to adjust it a little bit, but it's a good rule of thumb to start at around, let's say, minus 6 dB from the level of the kick. Usually I'm anchoring my kick here at minus 12 dB, but it really doesn't matter, because the only thing that matters is the kind of relation between the kick and the sub. So if you say, let's say, have the kick at 0 dB here in your project, and you have just your sub at minus 6. When you have it like the kick at minus 10, then have the sub at minus 16, and so on. I think you will get the idea. So that's the first, it's a good starting point. And then you can just adjust it later in your project so that the relation is still in the same ballpark. And usually when you have enabled your mastering chain and everything is at the final target loudness level, then you can pull up a meter. In my case, I'm using the BX meter from Brainworks, but you can use any meter. The only thing which you have to take care of is that please do some referencing with professional tracks, because a meter is not always the same. Different meters show different values depending on the algorithms they are using. But I know that meter very well because I'm using it all the time, so I know where my levels have to sit at a specific frequencies, because I've referenced it a lot with professional tracks. And if I have my mastering chain on and everything is playing at the final loudness, which is in my case in the very loudest part of the track, I have around -6 LUFS integrated, and of course it's a bit quieter in the intro and the outro, and then the overall level is of course less than that, because -6 is pretty loud. But anyways, then play the kind of loudest part in your track, and then use you can use an EQ or anything just to really solo the low frequencies. In my case, I'm soloing everything below 100 Hertz, and then I'm checking on my meter how loud just the low frequencies are. And let's just quickly check it. And you can see here that we're pretty much hitting -6 RMS with just the sub frequencies, and that's always like my target. Usually most of the tracks play the sub that plays between -5 and -7 RMS. And that's why usually my goal for sub frequencies is probably around -6, sometimes a little bit less, like -7. And if you have like very, very dark and bass heavy tracks, maybe it's even a little bit more. But in any case, if you're like staying around -6 or between -6 and -7 RMS, that's usually the sweet spot where you're still have it right. Because if you go higher, it can get problematic. It really depends on the track. But if you're staying between -6 and -7 RMS here, then it's pretty much always on point. You can also use the span, for example. And with the span here, it's usually, if you have set it in default mode, is that the bass hits pretty much -30 here on the scale, and I tend to rely more on the Brainworks meter because I'm using this a little bit more, and I think it's a little bit more precise, because sometimes the span shows values above 30, -30, but the Brainworks meter is still at let's say -6 RMS, and I think the algorithms are a bit different. Not exactly sure if the span uses for the frequency analyzer also a similar algorithm or RMS algorithm as the Brainworks. Probably it's a little bit different, but in any case, use a meter you really know, then load up some professional tracks in the same genre as you're making, quickly solo the low end, check at which level the low end sits in the professional tracks, and then you have a good idea where you have to put your low end to get in the same ballpark. And in the heavy techno genres, I can tell you that in most cases, if you're staying between -6 and -7 RMS on the Brainworks meter here, then you're good to go. So that's basically my tips to get the low end right. So first step is always get the sidechain right. Second step is make sure you don't have phase problems or very high volume jumps in your rumble or in your sub. Then have the sub at probably around 6 dB lower than your kick. And then in the final mastering or in the final step, just check it out where your sub sits if you're hitting your target loudness. And even if you don't mastering your track yourself, you can still just load up a limiter, put it at kind of the input level you need to get your target loudness, roughly, even if it's not perfectly the sound you want, just to get an idea where the low end sits if you're pushing your track to the final loudness. Because often it's the case that the volume relation between the kick and sub changes a lot, because if you think about it, if you push your track into a mastering chain, it will lower the highest peaks a lot, because the limiters will probably lower the peaks by like 3 to 6 dB for sure. So probably the kick hit is the kick transient is the loudest part in the track, so the kick transient will get lowered by, let's say, 3 to 6 dB, but your sub gets pushed up in volume a lot without being limited. So the relation between the kick transient and the sub changes a lot during mastering, so you have to just be aware of that fact and to compensate it. So that even if you're sending it to a professional mastering engineer, you can still just quickly use a limiter and see where the kind of volume relation is sitting, and then you can compensate for that. And for example, just lowering the sub by 2 or 3 dB to still have it at the right volume level, as I told you before. So that's very important. And just final example, because if you're using sample pack kicks, a lot of times your samples will probably look like this, where you have like a very squared like kick waveform, and the tail is really high in volume. And with kicks like this, you get problems, because if you just like pulling this kick into your track and then just say, okay, yeah, it sounds good like this, and then you will hit your mastering chain. Let's just think about it. If you have a waveform, just a kick waveform looks like this, and then you're hitting your mastering chain, the limiter has to like pull everything down completely, and this is where you get a lot of distortion and get a lot of problems, because the sub is just too loud. And yeah, you have different options to fix that. One is just use any kind of volume automation. You can, for example, even use a utility plugin and make some automation here. You can also go into the sample and here use the volume to fix it, draw some automation. But most of the times I'm using my shaper box here, and use some volume shaping, and then I can just quickly draw a curve here, and come on, and then I just use something like this. Okay, let's unsolo it here. See, you can really hear that it gets problematic if you're hitting the mastering chain like this, where it's like really squashed already. You get a lot of problems, so you have to fix that. And you can use anything what is able to change like the volume, or you can automate the volume. Plugins like this, you can also use the LFO tool from Xfer. But just remember that the best thing to do is that your kick and sub kind of the shape looks kind of a triangle curve, so that it goes from the very top like a triangle shape down into the sub, and then it's pretty much like already good to hit the mastering chain, and you get a very tight and stable low end. Yeah. So I think that's all. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments and I will try to answer them all. If you also have requests for another video, just hit me up via direct message or leave a comment here, and I will see what I can do. So I hope this was helpful. See you in the next video. Ciao, bye bye.